Penelope Granger clutched the telegram with trembling hands, the sharp Arizona sun beating down on her as the terrible truth sank in. Her father had sold her future to save his ranch. "Marry Cornelius Blackburn or we lose everything," he'd written from their struggling homestead in Quartzsite. At 20 years old, Penny had dreamed of love, of choice not being bartered away to a man 3 decades her senior with a reputation that made even the toughest cowboys keep their distance. Arizona Territory, 1885. The stagecoach rattled over the rocky terrain, each jolt bringing Penelope closer to her unwanted fate. Dust swirled through the open windows, coating her simple blue traveling dress and settling into the folds of her skirts. She'd left her home in Missouri with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and the hollow promise from her father that Mr. Blackburn would grow on her in time. "First time to Quartzsite, miss." The older woman seated across from her smiled kindly, her weathered face creased with sun lines. "Yes," Penelope answered, trying to sound braver than she felt. "My father has arranged for me to be married there." The woman's smile faltered. "To whom, if you don't mind my asking?" "Cornelius Blackburn." The silence that followed told Penelope everything she needed to know. The other passengers exchanged glances, and the man beside the older woman cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I see," the woman finally said, patting Penelope's hand. "Well, Mr. Blackburn is certainly an established man. Established, not kind, not decent, just established." The stagecoach crested a hill, and Quartzsite came into view, a dusty collection of buildings shimmering in the heat. The town wasn't large, but it was growing, situated at a crossroads where miners, ranchers, and travelers converged. "That's Blackburn's place," the man said, pointing to a large white house on a hill overlooking the town. "Biggest ranch in the county now." Penelope's stomach twisted. Her new prison looked impressive from a distance, but even from here she could sense its coldness. The stagecoach pulled into town, wheels grinding to a halt before the dusty main street. Penelope stepped down, her legs unsteady after the long journey. No one was waiting for her. Her father had written that Mr. Blackburn would send someone, but the street was empty save for a few locals going about their business. "Miss Granger?" She turned to see a thin man with spectacles approaching. He wore a neat suit despite the heat, clutching a leather portfolio. "I'm Frederick Wilson, Mr. Blackburn's attorney. I'm to escort you to his home." His eyes assessed her quickly, and Penelope felt like livestock being appraised. "Your trunk will be delivered later. Please, this way." "Is Mr. Blackburn not able to greet me himself?" she asked, falling into step beside him. "Mr. Blackburn is concluding important business matters. He expects to dine with you this evening." Wilson's tone suggested this was more than sufficient attention for someone in her position. They walked toward a waiting carriage, passing the town's various establishments: the mercantile, the assayer's office, a saloon with swinging doors from which piano music spilled into the street. Outside the saloon, a man was loading supplies onto a pack mule. He straightened as they passed, and Penelope caught his gaze. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were simple but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. A cowboy's hat sat low on his brow, but not low enough to hide the intensity of his stare. Something passed between them in that brief moment, a current of recognition though they'd never met. Then Wilson cleared his throat impatiently, and Penelope continued walking, feeling the stranger's eyes following her until they turned the corner. The carriage ride to Blackburn's ranch was silent and tense. As they approached the imposing house, Penelope saw it was even larger than it had appeared from a distance. White columns supported a wide veranda, and manicured gardens surrounded the property, a stark contrast to the wild desert beyond. "Mr. Blackburn has spent considerable resources making this the finest home in the territory," Wilson said, misinterpreting her wide-eyed expression as admiration rather than dread. A housekeeper met them at the door, a stern-faced woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Porter. "I'll show Miss Granger to her room," she said to Wilson. "Mr. Blackburn has instructed that she is to rest before dinner." Penelope followed Mrs. Porter up a grand staircase, noting the expensive furnishings that filled the house. Everything was ornate, ostentatious, designed to impress rather than comfort. Her room was large but cold despite the Arizona heat. A four-poster bed dominated the space, and a vanity table stood near the window that overlooked the sprawling ranch lands. "Your trunk will be brought up when it arrives," Mrs. Porter said. "Mr. Blackburn dines at 7 precisely. I'll send someone to help you dress at 6:30. With that, the woman left, closing the door firmly behind her. Penelope stood motionless in the center of the room, her new cage, and finally allowed herself to cry. At precisely 6:30, a young maid named Lucy arrived to help Penelope dress for dinner. The girl was friendly but guarded, answering Penelope's questions with careful brevity. "How long have you worked for Mr. Blackburn?" Penelope asked as Lucy fastened the buttons of her best dress, a sage green creation that her mother had sewn before she passed. "3 years, miss." "And is he a good employer?" Lucy's hands paused momentarily. "He pays well, miss." "And punctually?" "Not kind, then. Not fair. Just wealthy." At 7 o'clock, Penelope descended the staircase, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the house. In the dining room, a table long enough to seat 20 was set for 2, with Cornelius Blackburn standing at its head. He was tall and lean, with silver hair at his temples and cold gray eyes that assessed her like a purchase. At 53, his face was lined with years of hard dealings, his mouth set in a permanent downward curve. "Miss Granger," he said, not bothering to cross the room to greet her. "You've arrived safely." "Good, Mr. Blackburn," she replied, curtsying slightly as her mother had taught her. "Thank you for your hospitality. Sit," he instructed, gesturing to the chair at his right. The journey must have been tiresome. Dinner was an excruciating affair. Blackburn asked perfunctory questions about her journey but showed no interest in her answers. Instead, he spoke at length about his business interests, the ranch, his investments in the silver mines, his plans to expand his holdings further into the territory. "Your father's land is small but well situated," he said between bites of steak. "Once we're married, I'll absorb it into my operations. It should provide a decent return." Penelope's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "My father's land, but I thought that I was helping him keep it." Blackburn laughed sharply. "My dear, your father owes me a considerable sum. The arrangement we've made allows him to salvage his pride by claiming he's giving you away rather than admitting he's lost everything to his creditors. The land comes to me either way." The food turned to ashes in Penelope's mouth. Not only was she being sold, but her father had lied about the terms of the sale. "When will the wedding take place?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. 2 weeks from Saturday. Arrangements have already been made. The ceremony will be here, of course." "A small affair. I've no patience for elaborate celebrations. 2 weeks. 14 days of freedom remaining. And what will be expected of me as your wife?" she forced herself to ask, though she dreaded the answer. Blackburn's cold eyes swept over her. "You'll maintain this house, appear at my side when required for social obligations, and provide me with heirs. I'm not an unreasonable man, Miss Granger. Fulfill your duties and you'll want for nothing material." Nothing material. But everything else, love, companionship, happiness, those weren't part of the bargain. Later, alone in her room, Penelope stared out the window at the star-filled desert sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled a lonely, mournful sound that matched the aching in her heart. She would not cry again. Tears wouldn't change her situation. She needed a plan, but escape seemed impossible. She had no money, nowhere to go, and her father had made it clear she couldn't return home. She was trapped. The next morning, Penelope awoke determined to learn more about her prison and her jailer. After breakfast, taken alone, as Blackburn had already departed for business in town, she asked Mrs. Porter for permission to explore the grounds. Mr. Blackburn didn't leave instructions to confine you to the house, the housekeeper said with a slight frown. But don't wander beyond the garden. The ranch hands are working, and Mr. Blackburn wouldn't approve of you mingling with them. The gardens were beautiful but soulless geometric patterns of imported plants struggling against the desert climate, maintained at great expense to satisfy Blackburn's vanity. Penelope walked the gravel paths, mentally counting her options. She could run, but to where? She could refuse the marriage, but at what cost to her father? A sound caught her attention: horses approaching. From around the side of the house came a group of riders, led by a man she recognized instantly. The cowboy from town. Up close, he was even more striking, with a day's worth of stubble shadowing his strong jaw and a quiet confidence in his posture. The men dismounted, leading their horses toward the stables. The cowboy glanced up and saw her standing there. For the second time their eyes met, and Penelope felt that same inexplicable connection. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, a gesture so simple yet somehow intimate. "Miss," he called, his voice deep and warm. "Fine morning." Before she could reply, Mrs. Porter appeared at her side. "Miss Granger, please come inside. These men are here to speak with the foreman, not to socialize." Penelope allowed herself to be led back to the house, but not before glancing over her shoulder. The cowboy was still watching her, a curious expression on his face. Who was that man? She asked Mrs. Porter once they were inside. The housekeeper's mouth tightened. "Jackson Emerson. He works at the R Ranch to the east. He has no business here." "Then why was he—" "Mr. Blackburn is purchasing cattle from the R," Mrs. Porter interrupted. "That's all you need to know." That afternoon, Penelope was summoned to Blackburn's study, a dark paneled room filled with leather-bound books that appeared unread and hunting trophies that stared accusingly from the walls. "I've arranged for the seamstress to come tomorrow," he said without preamble. "You'll need a wedding dress and appropriate clothing for your new position." "That's very generous," Penelope said carefully. "It's necessary." Blackburn didn't look up from his papers. "You'll also accompany me to church on Sunday. The town should become accustomed to seeing us together before the wedding." "Yes, sir." He glanced up sharply. "You'll address me as Cornelius until we're married. Afterward, you may call me husband in private and Mr. Blackburn in public." Penelope nodded, swallowing her distaste. "One more thing," he added. "I understand you spoke with Jackson Emerson this morning." Penelope's cheeks heated. "We merely exchanged greetings. In future you will not speak to any man without my permission. Is that clear?" "But is that clear?" Each word fell like a hammer blow. "Yes, Cornelius." Blackburn's mouth curved in what might have been meant as a smile but looked more like a grimace. "Good, you may go." Sunday arrived with cloudless skies and merciless heat. Penelope wore a new dress, pale blue with lace at the collar and cuffs, far more elaborate than anything she'd owned before. Blackburn drove them to town in his carriage, nodding curtly to those who greeted him but engaging in no real conversation. The church was the largest building in Quartzsite, its white painted boards gleaming in the sun. As they approached, Penelope felt the weight of curious stares. Everyone knew who she was and why she had come. Inside, they sat in the front pew, Blackburn's usual place, she learned. The service passed in a blur, with Penelope too aware of the whispers behind them to focus on the sermon. When it ended, Blackburn kept a proprietary hand at her elbow as they moved into the churchyard. Cornelius, a robust man with mutton-chop sideburns, approached. "Fine sermon today." "Judge Harmon," Blackburn nodded. "Allow me to introduce Miss Penelope Granger, my fiancée." "Delighted, my dear," the judge said, bowing slightly. "You're a fortunate young lady." More introductions followed: the mayor and his wife, the bank manager, the owner of the mercantile. All offered congratulations that rang hollow to Penelope's ears. None questioned the match between a young woman and a man more than twice her age. In their world, such arrangements were commonplace, practical rather than romantic. As the crowd thinned, Penelope saw him again. Jackson Emerson stood near the church gate, deep in conversation with an older man. Today, he wore a clean white shirt and dark vest, his cowboy hat held respectfully at his side while in the churchyard. He looked up as if sensing her gaze, and once again their eyes met. This time he frowned slightly, his eyes moving to Blackburn's hand still gripping her elbow. Something like concern flashed across his features before he turned back to his companion. "Come," Blackburn said, steering her toward their carriage. "We've made our appearance." But as they passed through the gate, Jackson stepped forward. "Mr. Blackburn," he said, his voice polite but firm. "A word, if I may." Blackburn stiffened. "What is it, Emerson? Sunday is hardly the time for business. It's about the cattle sale. There's been a complication." Blackburn's fingers dug into Penelope's arm before he released her. "Wait in the carriage," he ordered, then moved a few paces away with Jackson. Penelope climbed into the carriage but watched through the window as the men spoke. The conversation appeared tense, with Jackson gesturing toward the hills beyond town and Blackburn repeatedly shaking his head. Finally, Blackburn turned on his heel and returned to the carriage. "Problem with the cattle?" Penelope asked as they drove away. Blackburn's face was tight with anger. "Nothing that concerns you." But she had seen enough of his expression to know that whatever Jackson had said had unsettled him deeply. The next morning, Penelope was surprised when Blackburn announced he was taking her to town. "The bank has papers requiring your signature," he explained. "Since you'll soon be managing the household accounts, you should become familiar with the town's businesses." It was the first indication that she might have any independence at all, and Penelope seized the opportunity. "I'd like that very much." The town was bustling with Monday activity, freight wagons delivering supplies, ranchers conducting business, shoppers moving between the various stores. Blackburn led her first to the bank, a solid brick building with quartzite Territorial Bank emblazoned across its facade. Inside, they were immediately ushered into the manager's office. The paperwork involved was complex forms transferring her non-existent assets to Blackburn's control after the marriage, agreements regarding inheritance, documents that would give her access to an allowance but no real financial power. "Sign here," Blackburn directed, pointing to a line at the bottom of yet another page. Penelope hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. "May I read it first?" The bank manager glanced nervously at Blackburn, whose expression darkened. "It's a standard agreement," Blackburn said. "Women aren't expected to understand these matters." "Nevertheless," Penelope said, surprising herself with her courage, "I'd prefer to know what I'm signing." For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then Blackburn gave a curt nod. "Very well. Though I assure you, it contains nothing unexpected." He was right. The document merely formalized what she already knew. Upon marriage, she would legally cease to exist as an independent person. Still, the act of reading it rather than blindly obeying gave her a small sense of control. After the bank, they visited the mercantile. Blackburn instructed the owner to allow Penelope to make purchases on his account within reason and to report any unusual requests directly to him. Like a child needing permission, she thought bitterly. "I have business at the land office," Blackburn said as they exited the store. "You may browse the shops on this street until I return. 1 hour, no more." It was the first time since her arrival that she'd been allowed out of his sight. As soon as he disappeared into the land office, Penelope exhaled deeply, feeling as if a weight had temporarily lifted. She wandered along the boardwalk, peering into shop windows without really seeing the displays. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could she use this small freedom to plan an escape? But where would she go with no money and no friends? Lost in thought, she didn't notice the approaching figure until a deep voice startled her. "Miss Granger." She looked up to find Jackson Emerson standing before her, hat in hand. "Mr. Emerson," she replied, glancing nervously toward the land office. "He'll be in there a while," Jackson said, following her gaze. "Land Commissioner Wilkins is known for his thoroughness." Penelope hesitated, remembering Blackburn's warning about speaking to men, but her curiosity about this cowboy who had twice caught her attention won out. You seem to know a great deal about Mr. Blackburn's business, Mr. Emerson. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. In a town this size, everyone knows everyone's business. He gestured to a bench outside the millinery shop. Would you care to sit for a moment? You look like you could use a friendly face. She knew she should refuse, but the prospect of honest conversation was too tempting. They sat, maintaining a respectable distance between them. You're not from Arizona, he observed. Missouri, she confirmed. My father's ranch is there, or was, I suppose. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. And now you're to marry Cornelius Blackburn. In less than 2 weeks, she said, unable to keep the despair from her voice. May I speak plainly, Miss Granger? She nodded, intrigued by the serious turn in his expression. Blackburn is not a good man, Jackson said quietly. I've worked cattle in this territory for 8 years, and I've seen how he operates. He doesn't build his fortune, he takes it from others. Penelope's heart raced. What are you saying? I'm saying that your father isn't the first to lose everything to him, and he won't be the last. Jackson leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. And I'm saying that a woman like you deserves better than to be part of his collection. I have no choice, she whispered. My father, there's always a choice, Jackson interrupted. Sometimes it just takes courage to see it. Before she could respond, he straightened suddenly, his gaze moving past her. Penelope turned to see Blackburn striding toward them, his face a thundercloud. I should go, Jackson said, rising quickly. Think about what I said, Miss Granger. He touched his hat and walked away, passing Blackburn with a polite nod that was not returned. What did I tell you about speaking to men? Blackburn hissed, gripping Penelope's arm painfully as he pulled her to her feet. He was merely being polite, she protested. Emerson has no interest in politeness where I'm concerned, Blackburn said. We're leaving? Now. The ride back to the ranch was tense with Blackburn's barely contained fury. Once home, he marched her straight to his study and slammed the door behind them. You embarrass me in public, he said, pacing before his desk. What did Emerson want? Nothing, Penelope insisted. He just introduced himself. Liar. Blackburn slammed his fist on the desk, making her jump. That man has been a thorn in my side since he arrived in this territory. Whatever he told you was designed to drive a wedge between us. There is no us, Penelope said, finding courage in her anger. There's only a business arrangement that you made with my father. Blackburn's face contorted with rage. He stepped toward her, hand raised, and Penelope flinched, preparing for a blow that didn't come. Instead, he lowered his arm slowly, visibly regaining control. You will learn your place, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Until the wedding, you will not leave this house without me. You will not speak to anyone I haven't approved, and if I ever see you with Emerson again, your father will face consequences he cannot imagine. He dismissed her with a wave, and Penelope fled to her room, shaking with fear and indignation. Through the window, she could see the sun beginning to set over the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, Jackson Emerson had suggested, lay another choice if she had the courage to take it. 3 days passed with Penelope effectively a prisoner in Blackburn's home. She was allowed in the gardens, but never alone, with either Mrs. Porter or one of the maids always accompanying her. Meals were taken with Blackburn in stone-cold silence, and the rest of her time was filled with endless fittings for her wedding dress and trousseau. On the 4th day, as she sat in the garden pretending to read while Lucy darned stockings nearby, a commotion erupted from the direction of the stables. Men were shouting, horses neighing in distress. Stay here, miss, Lucy said, rising to investigate. The moment the maid disappeared around the corner, Penelope set down her book and moved swiftly to the garden wall. It wasn't high-designed for decoration rather than security, and she found she could see over it by standing on a decorative stone bench. Beyond the wall lay a small side road that connected to the main approach to the house. And on that road, seemingly waiting, sat Jackson Emerson on horseback. Their eyes met, and he raised a finger to his lips in a gesture for silence. Then he beckoned to her. Penelope hesitated only a moment. The shouting from the stables continued, clearly a deliberately created distraction. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance. She gathered her skirts and, with a strength born of desperation, pulled herself up and over the wall. Jackson urged his horse forward the moment her feet touched the ground, extending his hand. "Quickly," he whispered. She took his hand, and he swung her up behind him on the horse. "Hold tight," he instructed. And then they were galloping away from Blackburn's ranch, dust billowing behind them as they raced toward the hills. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following game trails and dry creek beds where their tracks would be difficult to follow. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Jackson guided the horse into a narrow canyon where a small cabin stood beside a bubbling spring. "My line camp," he explained as he helped her down. "No one will look for you here." Inside, the cabin was simple but neat, a far cry from Blackburn's opulent house, but somehow more welcoming. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow bed stood in one corner, and a table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the single room. "It isn't much," Jackson said, lighting a lamp as darkness began to fall outside. "It's perfect," Penelope replied, and meant it. "But I don't understand. Why are you helping me?" Jackson hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Sit down," he said gently. "This is a long story." He built a small fire to ward off the evening chill, then set a pot of coffee to boil. When they were both seated at the rough wooden table, cups of steaming coffee before them, he began. "My father owned a ranch near Prescott," he said. "Not large, but good land with clear water rights. 5 years ago, Cornelius Blackburn decided he wanted it." Penelope's stomach tightened, already anticipating where this tale was heading. "First, he tried to buy it outright. When my father refused, things started happening. Our cattle fell sick with no explanation. Our best horse was found dead. Market prices for our beef mysteriously dropped." Jackson's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "Then the bank called in loans my father didn't know he had. Documents appeared with his signature forged, but good enough to convince a judge. Within a year, we lost everything." "I'm so sorry," Penelope whispered. "My father took his own life," Jackson continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I found him in the barn the day before we were to be evicted." "That's terrible," Penelope said, fighting back tears. "I promised myself then that I would find a way to bring Blackburn to justice. I've spent years gathering evidence of his crimes, the forged documents, the bribes, the threats. I'm close, Miss Granger, very close. And I'm just another one of his victims," she said softly. Jackson reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to be, that's why I helped you escape. But what about my father? Blackburn will blame him for my disappearance. Your father is safe. He's in Kansas City now, staying with his brother. I sent him money for the journey 2 weeks ago." Penelope stared at him in shock. "You've been planning this all along," Jackson nodded. "When I heard Blackburn was bringing in a young bride from Missouri, I made inquiries. Your father was reluctant at first, but when I explained what kind of man Blackburn truly is, he agreed to my plan. My father knows I'm here." Hope blossomed in her chest. "He knows you're safe. He doesn't know where exactly, better that way, but he sent this." Jackson reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Penelope opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, in her father's familiar handwriting, were the words, "Forgive me, I was blind, be safe, be free." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't understand." "The telegram he sent, saying I had to marry Blackburn or we'd lose everything." "Blackburn probably dictated it," Jackson said. "It's his way, using family against each other." She wiped her eyes. "What happens now? Now we wait. I have friends bringing documents from Santa Fe, proof of Blackburn's crimes. Once they arrive, we take everything to the territorial judge. And until then," Jackson's expression softened. "Until then, you stay here where you're safe. I'll bring supplies tomorrow. No one comes to this canyon except me." He rose and moved to a trunk in the corner, withdrawing a bundle of clothing. "These belong to my sister. They might not fit perfectly, but they'll be more practical than what you're wearing." "You've thought of everything," Penelope said, amazed at his foresight. Not everything, he admitted with a wry smile. I didn't expect you to be so beautiful, for instance. Makes my job of protecting you a lot harder. Penelope blushed, unused to such direct compliments. I'm grateful for your help, Mr. Emerson, truly. Jackson, he corrected. If we're going to be hiding out together, you might as well use my name. Jackson, she repeated, liking the way it felt on her tongue. And I'm Penelope, Penny to my friends. Are we friends, then? He asked, a spark of something more than friendship in his eyes. I'd like us to be, she answered honestly. He nodded, seeming satisfied with that for now. I should go. The distraction at the stables won't keep Blackburn occupied forever, and I need to be seen in town, establishing my whereabouts when you disappeared. Will you come back tomorrow? She couldn't keep the anxiety from her voice at the thought of being alone. At first light, he promised. There's food in the cupboard, water from the spring, and the door has a strong bolt. You'll be safe here. After he left, Penelope changed into the simple skirt and blouse he'd provided, then explored her temporary sanctuary. The cabin was basic, but had everything needed for survival: dried food, cooking implements, blankets, even a few books on a small shelf. She bolted the door as Jackson had instructed and crawled into the narrow bed. Despite the strange surroundings and the uncertainty of her situation, she slept better than she had since arriving in Quartzsite. True to his word, Jackson returned at dawn, bringing fresh bread, bacon, and news from town. Blackburn's in a rage, he reported as they shared breakfast. He's offering a reward for information about your whereabouts. Will anyone suspect you? Penelope asked, worried. I was playing poker at the saloon when word of your disappearance reached town, he said with a smile. Half a dozen men can swear I was there all evening. You really have planned everything. I've waited years for a chance to bring Blackburn down, Jackson said. I couldn't risk failing because of poor planning. They fell into a routine over the next few days. Jackson would come at dawn, bringing supplies and news, then leave to work at the Triple R Ranch to maintain appearances. He would return in the evening, and they would share a simple dinner while talking long into the night. Penelope learned that Jackson was 31, had worked cattle since he was 14, and dreamed of having his own ranch again someday. He learned that she loved books, had a talent for sketching, and had once hoped to become a teacher before her mother's illness had required her to stay home. On the 5th day, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Jackson turned to her with a serious expression. My friends should arrive from Santa Fe tomorrow with the documents, he said. Once we have them, we can go to the judge. And then what happens? Penelope asked. If all goes well, Blackburn will be arrested. His assets will be frozen pending investigation. Some might even be returned to their rightful owners. And me? What happens to me? Jackson took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. That depends on you, Penny. Your father sent enough money for you to return to Missouri if that's what you want. She looked down at their joined hands. And if that's not what I want, then, he said softly, you might consider staying in Arizona. It's a hard land but beautiful in its way. A person could build a good life here, the right person. Penelope's heart quickened. Are you asking me something, Jackson? He moved closer, his gray eyes intent on hers. I'm asking if you might consider a future that includes me. Not now, it's too soon, I know that. But someday. I think, she said carefully, that I could very easily consider such a future. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and when she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle and sweet it brought tears to her eyes. I've wanted to do that since I first saw you, he confessed. I'm glad you waited, she replied. It means more this way. They sat together as darkness fell, talking of possibilities, of hopes, of dreams long deferred that might now have a chance to bloom. The next morning dawned with dark clouds gathering on the horizon, a rare summer storm brewing. Jackson arrived earlier than usual, his expression grim. What's wrong? Penelope asked immediately. Blackburn knows, he said without preamble. Someone saw me riding in this direction yesterday and reported it. He's gathering men to search the canyons. Fear clutched at Penelope's heart. What do? We leave now. My friends arrived with the documents last night. They're waiting for us in a place called People's Valley, about 30 miles north. We can be there by nightfall if we ride hard. They packed quickly only essentials that would fit in saddlebags. Jackson had brought a second horse for Penelope, a gentle mare with a smooth gait. Stay close to me, he instructed as they mounted. If we get separated, continue north, follow the sun. They rode out of the canyon just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The storm intensified quickly, turning the trail to mud and limiting visibility. Thunder crashed around them and lightning split the sky in jagged bursts. We need to find shelter, Jackson shouted over the storm's roar. There's a cave about 2 miles ahead. They pushed on, soaked to the skin and chilled despite the summer heat. When the cave finally appeared a dark mouth in the cliff face, it seemed like salvation. They dismounted, leading the nervous horses inside. The cave was dry and deeper than it first appeared. Jackson quickly built a small fire using wood he'd packed in his saddlebags, its warm light pushing back the gloom. The storm might work in our favor, he said as they huddled near the flames. It'll wash away our tracks. Penelope nodded, her teeth chattering as she tried to wring water from her hair. Jackson noticed and immediately removed his jacket, draping it around her shoulders despite being wet himself. You'll catch your death, she protested. I'm used to rough weather, he replied. You need it more than I do. As the fire grew, warming the small space, they spread their damp clothes on rocks to dry and shared a meal of jerky and hardtack from Jackson's supplies. Tell me more about your evidence against Blackburn, Penelope said, partly from curiosity and partly to distract herself from their precarious situation. Jackson withdrew a waterproof pouch from his saddlebag and removed several documents. Bank records showing bribes to officials. Correspondence about deliberate sabotage of competing ranches. Forged loan documents, including those used against my father. How did you get these? Slowly, carefully. I've made friends in strategic places over the years, clerks, bank tellers, even one of Blackburn's former ranch hands who witnessed things he couldn't stomach. It's remarkable, Penelope said, examining the papers. And dangerous. You risk so much. Some things are worth the risk, Jackson replied, his eyes meeting hers in the firelight. The storm raged outside for hours. By the time it finally began to subside, night had fallen. We'll stay here until dawn, Jackson decided. Riding these trails in the dark would be too dangerous. They settled as comfortably as possible, sharing the single blanket Jackson had packed. Penelope was acutely aware of his proximity, of the strength in his body as he sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance despite their close quarters. Jackson, she said softly. What happens after Blackburn is arrested? To us, I mean. He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. I don't want to pressure you, Penny. You've been through so much, and you deserve time to decide your own future. I know what I don't want, she said. I don't want to return to Missouri. There's nothing for me there now. And what do you want? His voice was low, careful. Penelope took a deep breath. I want to stay in Arizona. I want to see if what I'm feeling for you might grow into something lasting. Jackson turned to her then, his expression so tender it made her heart ache. I've never met anyone like you, he said. Your courage, your spirit, from the first moment I saw you, I knew you were something special. Even though I was promised to another man, especially then, he said. The sadness in your eyes broke my heart. All I wanted was to see you smile. Penelope reached for his hand. You've given me reason to smile again. He pulled her gently closer, and this time when their lips met, the kiss was deeper, filled with promise and longing. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, he said, I want to court you properly. No pressure, no rush, just a chance to know each other without danger hanging over us. I'd like that, she whispered. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the fire burning low as the storm finally passed and stars appeared in the desert sky. Morning came clear and bright, the storm-washed air carrying the scent of wet sage and desert blooms. They set out early, riding north through canyons and across mesas, always alert for signs of pursuit. By midday, they had covered nearly 20 miles. "We're making good time," Jackson said as they paused to rest the horses beside a small spring. "Another 10 miles and we'll reach People's Valley." Penelope was sore from the unaccustomed riding, but determined not to complain. "Your friends, who are they?" A lawyer named Michael Thornton and his wife, Sarah. Michael used to work for the territorial government until he saw too much corruption. Now he helps people like me build cases against men like Blackburn. They mounted up again, continuing north. The landscape changed subtly, the harsh desert giving way to grasslands dotted with juniper and pine. It was beautiful country, wild and open, and Penelope found herself falling in love with its rugged charm. "There," Jackson pointed ahead as they crested a rise. "People's Valley." Below them stretched a green valley cradled between mountain ranges, a silver ribbon of creek running through its center. Several ranches were visible, their buildings small at this distance. "The Thorntons have a place near the creek," Jackson said. "We'll be there within the hour." They were halfway down the slope when Jackson suddenly reined in his horse, his body tense. "Riders," he said, pointing to a cloud of dust moving along the valley floor. "Coming from the south." Penelope's heart sank. "Blackburn? Can't tell from here, but we can't take chances. This way." He led them off the trail into a stand of juniper trees that offered some concealment. Through breaks in the foliage, they watched the riders approach 6 men moving fast, their horses showing signs of hard travel. "It's them," Jackson confirmed grimly as the group drew closer. "Blackburn's in the lead. How did they find us?" Penelope whispered. "The storm may have washed away our tracks, but there are only so many routes north from Quartzsite. Blackburn knows these lands as well as I do." Jackson's face was set in hard lines. "We need to reach the Thorntons before they catch up to us." They waited until the search party had passed, then backtracked and took a different route, rougher terrain but less exposed. "The Thornton Ranch is just beyond that ridge," Jackson said an hour later. "We're close." As they topped the ridge, the ranch came into view, a neat collection of buildings surrounding a 2-story house with a wide porch. Relief flooded through Penelope at the sight of sanctuary so near. Then a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt just ahead of Jackson's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating him. "Ride," Jackson shouted, regaining control. "Don't stop for anything." They spurred their horses forward as more shots followed, none finding their mark but coming close enough to send fear coursing through Penelope's veins. Behind them, she heard shouts and the thunder of pursuing hooves. The distance to the ranch seemed to stretch impossibly as they galloped across the open ground. Penelope's mare was tiring, falling slightly behind Jackson's more powerful mount. "Almost there," he encouraged, looking back at her. Then suddenly, there were people on the Thornton Ranch, a man with a rifle and a woman beside him. The man raised his weapon and fired over their heads toward their pursuers. "That's Michael," Jackson called. "We're safe." They clattered into the ranch yard, their horses heaving with exertion. Jackson dismounted in one fluid motion and lifted Penelope from her saddle just as her legs gave out. "Inside, quickly," ordered the man with the rifle, Michael Thornton, she presumed. His wife was already holding the door open. Once inside, Michael barred the door while his wife, Sarah, led them through to the kitchen at the rear of the house. "You made it," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We were worried when you didn't arrive last night." "The storm delayed us," Jackson explained, still holding Penelope's hand tightly. "And Blackburn's closer than I'd like." Michael joined them, rifle still in hand. "They've stopped at the edge of the property," he reported. "Blackburn won't risk coming closer with witnesses around." "For now," Jackson agreed, "but he won't give up easily." Sarah, a practical-looking woman with kind eyes, busied herself preparing coffee and food. You both look exhausted. Eat something while we plan our next move. Over a hastily assembled meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, they discussed options. The judge is expecting us, Michael said. I sent word as soon as I received your message that you had the girl and the documents. How far to the judge? Penelope asked. He's in Prescott, about 40 miles from here, Michael replied. We could leave at first light tomorrow. Blackburn will be watching the roads, Jackson pointed out. We'll take the mountain trail, Michael said. It's longer but less traveled. Blackburn likely doesn't know about it. A commotion outside interrupted their planning. Sarah moved to the window. It's Blackburn, she reported. He's coming to the door alone. Michael exchanged glances with Jackson. I'll handle this. You two stay out of sight. Sarah led them to a small bedroom off the kitchen while Michael went to the front door. Through the wall, they could hear the murmur of voices, Michael's calm and measured, another man's sharp and demanding. That's Blackburn, Jackson whispered, his jaw tight with tension. The conversation continued for several minutes, occasionally rising in volume before subsiding again. Finally, they heard the front door close and Michael's footsteps returning to the kitchen. He's gone for now, Michael said when they rejoined him, but he's made his position clear. He wants his property returned, meaning you, Miss Granger, and he's threatening charges against Jackson for kidnapping. That's absurd, Penelope protested. I left willingly. Blackburn claims you're not of sound mind, Michael explained grimly. That Jackson took advantage of your vulnerable state to turn you against your betrothed. He's desperate, Jackson said. He knows we have evidence that could destroy him. More desperate than I anticipated, Michael agreed. He's gathered quite a force, his own men plus several hired guns from town. They're camped just beyond my property line. We're putting you in danger by being here, Penelope said, distressed. Sarah squeezed her hand. Don't worry about that. Michael and I have dealt with men like Blackburn before. Still, we need to move quickly, Michael said. I suggest we leave for Prescott tonight after dark. The mountain trail is challenging but navigable by moonlight if you know it well. I know it, Jackson confirmed. My father and I used to hunt those ridges. The plan was set. They would rest for a few hours, then depart under cover of darkness. Michael would create a diversion to draw Blackburn's attention while they slipped away. Sarah showed Penelope to a bedroom where she could rest. Try to sleep, she advised. Tonight will be challenging. But sleep proved elusive. Every time Penelope closed her eyes, she saw Blackburn's cold face, heard his threats. After an hour of tossing restlessly, she gave up and went in search of Jackson. She found him on the back porch, staring out at the mountains that would be their route to safety. Couldn't sleep, he asked as she joined him. Too much on my mind, she admitted. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley. Are you afraid? He asked finally. Yes, she answered honestly, but not of the journey. I'm afraid of what Blackburn might do to stop us. Jackson turned to face her. I won't let him hurt you, Penny, I promise you that. It's not just me I'm worried about, she said. You've risked everything to help me. If anything happened to you because of me, nothing will happen, he interrupted, taking her hands in his. We'll reach the judge, present our evidence, and Blackburn will face justice, and after that. After that, she prompted when he hesitated. Jackson's eyes softened. After that, we can begin again, both of us together if you want. I do want that, Penelope said, feeling more certain of this than anything in her life. Very much. He gathered her into his arms, holding her close as if to shield her from all harm. When I first saw you in quartzsite, he murmured against her hair, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. But now I know your true beauty is in your courage, your resilience. I wasn't brave until I met you, she said. You gave me hope when I had none. Jackson tilted her face up to his. Penny, he said softly, if we get through this, when we get through this, I want you to know that I'm falling in love with you. Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and unexpected in the midst of danger. I'm falling in love with you too, Jackson. I think I started the moment you offered me your hand at the garden wall. He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and passion and possibility. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. We should get ready, he said reluctantly. It'll be dark soon. Night fell swiftly, the mountain shadows stretching across the valley, until all was cloaked in darkness save for the silver light of a waxing moon. Michael had gone ahead to set his diversion, a small fire in an abandoned shed at the far end of his property that would draw Blackburn's men away from the mountain trail. Sarah helped Penelope dress in practical clothing suitable for the difficult journey ahead: sturdy trousers beneath a split riding skirt, a warm jacket, and boots with good ankle support. The mountain trail is treacherous in places, she warned as she packed food and other necessities. Stay close to Jackson at all times. I will, Penelope promised. Thank you for everything, Sarah. The older woman squeezed her hand. Just reach the judge safely, that will be thanks enough. Jackson appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. It's time. Michael's diversion should be starting any moment. They moved silently to the back of the house where their horses waited, freshly rested and supplied for the journey. In the distance, shouts erupted, followed by the orange glow of flames. There it goes, Jackson said. Let's move while they're distracted. They mounted quickly and set off toward the shadowy mountains, keeping to the darkness beneath the trees. Penelope's heart pounded with fear and exhilaration as they rode, constantly glancing back to see if pursuit had been noticed. The mountain trail was exactly as Sarah had described: narrow and challenging, with steep switchbacks and rocky passages that required careful navigation even in daylight. By moonlight, it was a test of nerve and skill. Jackson led the way, occasionally reaching back to guide Penelope's mare through particularly difficult sections. They climbed steadily, the lights of the valley falling away below them until they were enveloped in the quiet darkness of the high country. We're making good time, Jackson said during a brief rest to water the horses. If we continue at this pace, we'll reach the northern slope by dawn and be in Prescott by midday. Penelope nodded, too tired to speak but determined to keep going. Her body ached from 2 days of hard riding, and fear had worn her nerves raw, but the thought of reaching safety and justice kept her moving forward. They rode through the night, the moon casting silver light on the trail before them. As Jackson had predicted, dawn found them descending the northern slope of the mountains, with Prescott visible in the distance, a proper town with brick buildings and church spires catching the first rays of sunlight. We made it, Penelope said, relief washing through her. Jackson smiled, exhaustion evident in the lines of his face but satisfaction in his eyes. Not quite yet, but close. The judge's office is near the courthouse in the center of town. They approached Prescott cautiously, alert for any sign that Blackburn had somehow outflanked them. The town was just beginning to stir, shopkeepers opening their doors, a few early risers moving along the boardwalks. There, Jackson pointed to a substantial brick building with territorial offices carved above its entrance. The judge should be arriving soon. They dismounted a block away and approached on foot, leading their tired horses. Jackson's hand rested reassuringly at the small of Penelope's back, a touch that gave her courage as they climbed the steps to the imposing building. Inside, a clerk informed them that Judge Wilson had not yet arrived but was expected shortly. They were shown to a waiting area, a room with wooden benches and large windows overlooking the street. We're so close, Penelope whispered, unable to believe that their ordeal might soon end. Jackson took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Just a little longer, he promised. Movement in the street caught his attention. His body tensed, and Penelope followed his gaze to see a group of riders approaching Blackburn at their head. How did he find us? She gasped. The telegraph, Jackson realized. He must have sent messages to every town within riding distance. The clerk returned, announcing that Judge Wilson had arrived and would see them immediately. As they rose to follow him, the main doors burst open, and Cornelius Blackburn strode in, flanked by two hard-faced men. "Stop right there, Emerson," he commanded. "You're not taking what's mine." The clerk froze, looking uncertainly between the two parties. "Sir, the judge is waiting. The judge will hear my complaint first," Blackburn interrupted. "This man has abducted my fiancée and stolen important documents from my property." "That's a lie," Jackson said calmly. "Miss Granger left of her own free will, and the documents in my possession prove criminal activity by Mr. Blackburn." "She's not in her right mind," Blackburn insisted, his cold eyes fixed on Penelope. "Come here, my dear, it's time to go home." Penelope straightened her spine, years of forced obedience falling away as she found her voice. "I am not your dear, Mr. Blackburn, nor will I ever be your wife. I left your house willingly, and I have testimony to give about your character and conduct." Blackburn's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful, that's quite enough," came an authoritative voice from behind them. A tall, silver-haired man in judicial robes stood in the doorway to the inner offices. "What is the meaning of this disturbance in my courthouse, Judge Wilson?" Jackson said with evident relief. "We have evidence of serious crimes committed by Cornelius Blackburn, including fraud, bribery of officials, and criminal intimidation." "These are baseless accusations," Blackburn blustered. "This man has kidnapped my fiancée and is attempting to slander me to cover his crimes." Judge Wilson assessed the situation with sharp eyes. "All of you into my chambers. Now, leave your men outside, Mr. Blackburn. This is a court of law, not a saloon." The judge's chambers were spacious and orderly, lined with law books and dominated by a large oak desk. He seated himself behind it, gesturing for the others to take chairs opposite. "Now," he said, "let's hear these allegations in a civilized manner. Mr. Emerson, you first." Jackson placed the waterproof pouch on the desk and carefully removed its contents. "These documents show a pattern of criminal behavior by Cornelius Blackburn spanning more than 5 years. Bank records showing bribes to officials. Correspondence regarding deliberate sabotage of competing ranches. Forged loan documents used to seize property from legitimate owners." As Jackson spoke, the judge examined the papers, his expression growing increasingly grave. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Emerson. How did you come by these documents?" Some were provided by former employees of Mr. Blackburn who witnessed his illegal activities. Others by bank employees concerned about irregularities. "The forged documents pertaining to my father's ranch I obtained from court records." "Your father's ranch?" the judge inquired. "The Circle E near Prescott," Jackson explained. "Cornelius Blackburn seized it through fraudulent means 5 years ago. My father took his own life as a result." Recognition dawned in the judge's eyes. "Emerson, you're Thomas Emerson's boy." "Yes, sir." Judge Wilson turned his attention to Blackburn. "These are grave charges, Mr. Blackburn." "What do you have to say in your defense?" Blackburn's composure was slipping, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. "These documents are forgeries. Emerson has held a grudge against me since his father's unfortunate death. He's fabricated evidence and now has corrupted my fiancée with lies." "I was never willingly your fiancée," Penelope interjected. "My father was coerced into the arrangement through threats and misrepresentation." "Is that so?" the judge asked, turning to her. Penelope nodded firmly. "Mr. Blackburn told my father that if I married him, our family ranch would be saved. In reality, he intended to absorb the land into his holdings regardless. He admitted as much to me directly." Judge Wilson studied the 3 people before him thoughtfully. "This will require a full investigation," he finally said. "Mr. Blackburn, I'm placing you under house arrest pending that investigation. You will surrender your weapons and return to quartzsite under escort. You are not to leave your property or contact Miss Granger in any way." "This is outrageous," Blackburn exploded. On the word of a vengeful cowboy and a hysterical woman, one more word, Mr. Blackburn, and I'll have you held in the Prescott jail instead, the judge warned. This court does not tolerate disrespect, especially toward ladies. Blackburn subsided, though his eyes promised vengeance. Judge Wilson turned to Jackson and Penelope. I'll need formal statements from both of you. Miss Granger, do you have safe accommodation in Prescott? She can stay with my sister, Jackson offered. Her husband is the doctor here in town. Very well. The judge rose, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll expect you both back here at 2 o'clock to provide your statements. Mr. Blackburn, my bailiff, will escort you and your men back to court site. As they left the judge's chambers, Blackburn brushed past Penelope, whispering viciously, "This isn't over." But his threats held no power now. For the first time since receiving her father's telegram, Penelope felt truly free, Jackson's sister, Elizabeth, and her husband, Dr. David Collins, welcomed them warmly to their comfortable home near the center of Prescott. Elizabeth, who shared her brother's gray eyes and forthright manner, immediately took Penelope under her wing. "You poor dear," she said, showing Penelope to a guest room. "A hot bath and clean clothes will help you feel human again. Then food and rest before you return to the judge." The promised bath was heavenly, washing away days of dust and fear. Dressed in a borrowed dress and with her hair neatly arranged, Penelope felt transformed not just physically, but emotionally. She was no longer Cornelius Blackburn's unwilling bride-to-be but her own woman, making her own choices. When she descended the stairs, she found Jackson waiting in the parlor, similarly refreshed and wearing clean clothes provided by his brother-in-law. His face brightened at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "I feel like myself again," she replied. "Or perhaps a new version of myself." Elizabeth served them a hearty lunch, then discreetly left them alone as they prepared to return to the courthouse. "Are you nervous?" Jackson asked as they walked the short distance to the judge's office. "A little," Penelope admitted, "but mostly relieved." "Whatever happens now, I'm free of Blackburn." "Not completely, not yet," Jackson cautioned. "The investigation will take time and Blackburn has powerful friends. But he can't force me to marry him anymore," she pointed out, "and that's what matters most to me." Their statements to Judge Wilson took several hours, with each recounting in detail their experiences with Cornelius Blackburn. The judge listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions but otherwise allowing them to speak without interruption. "You've both been through a terrible ordeal," he said when they had finished. "I want to assure you that I take these allegations very seriously. Mr. Blackburn will face justice if the evidence supports your claims, which, I must say, appears likely." "How long will the investigation take?" Jackson asked, difficult to say. "Weeks, perhaps months. These matters are complex, and Mr. Blackburn will undoubtedly hire the best legal representation available." The judge removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "In the meantime, Miss Granger, I advise you to remain in Prescott where you can be protected if necessary." "She's welcome to stay with us as long as needed," Jackson said. "My sister has already made that clear." The judge nodded approvingly. "Very good. I'll send word when there are developments in the case." As they left the courthouse, the setting sun bathed Prescott in golden light. Penelope paused on the steps, breathing deeply of the pine-scented air. "It's beautiful here," she said. "So different from Missouri or Quartzsite." "Arizona grows on you," Jackson agreed, smiling down at her. "Especially the high country." They walked slowly back toward the Collins home, in no hurry to end this moment of peace between them. "What will you do now?" Penelope asked. "I still have my job at the Triple R," Jackson said. "Though I've been saving to buy my own place someday. Nothing fancy, just good grazing land with clean water." "That sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Penny, I meant what I said before. I'm falling in love with you. These past days, difficult as they've been, have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, kind, resilient. I know it's too soon to ask for promises, but I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're willing. I'd like to court you properly." Penelope's heart swelled with emotion. "Jackson," she said softly, "after everything we've been through together, I can't imagine wanting anyone else. Yes, I'd like that very much." His smile was radiant as he took her hands in his. "Then that's what we'll do, slowly, properly, the way you deserve." In the golden light of the Arizona sunset, with the promise of freedom and justice before them, they sealed their understanding with a kiss that felt like coming home. The weeks that followed were a time of healing and discovery for Penelope. The Collins home became her sanctuary, with Elizabeth quickly becoming a dear friend as well as Jackson's sister. Dr. Collins, a kind and scholarly man, opened his extensive library to her, and Penelope devoured books on Arizona history, ranching, and local flora and fauna. Jackson visited whenever his duties at the RRR allowed, typically riding into town on Saturday afternoons and staying through Sunday. These visits became the highlight of Penelope's week, each one strengthening the bond between them. True to his word, Jackson courted her with respectful attentiveness. They attended church together, took walks through Prescott's pleasant streets, and enjoyed picnics in the pine-covered hills surrounding the town. Sometimes Elizabeth and David joined them, but often they were alone, talking for hours about their pasts, their dreams, their hopes for the future. "I've written to my father," Penelope told Jackson during one such outing, about a month after their arrival in Prescott. "He's relieved that I'm safe and has apologized again for his part in the arrangement with Blackburn." "Will he come to Arizona?" Jackson asked. She shook her head. "No, he's happy with my uncle in Kansas City. He's found work there and is slowly rebuilding his life." "And you?" "Do you miss Missouri?" Penelope considered the question carefully. "I miss certain things, the green fields, the changing seasons, but not enough to return. Arizona feels more like home now." The joy in Jackson's eyes told her this was the answer he'd hoped for. News from Judge Wilson came sporadically. The investigation into Blackburn's activities was extensive, with agents of the territorial government examining bank records, land transactions, and court documents spanning many years. "The evidence against Blackburn is mounting," the judge informed them during one update. "Several former associates have come forward with additional testimony since his arrest." "Has he tried to flee?" Jackson asked. "No, surprisingly, he remains at his ranch under guard. His attorneys are working furiously, of course, but the case against him is strong." Finally, 3 months after their flight from Quartzsite, a messenger arrived at the Collins home with news. Cornelius Blackburn had been indicted on multiple charges of fraud, bribery, and criminal intimidation. His assets had been frozen pending trial. "It's really happening," Penelope said when Jackson arrived that weekend and heard the news. "He's going to face justice." "It's more than I ever hoped for," Jackson admitted. "For years, I thought this day would never come." They celebrated that evening with Elizabeth and David, raising glasses of fine wine the doctor had been saving for a special occasion. "To justice," David toasted. "And to new beginnings," Elizabeth added with a meaningful glance between her brother and Penelope. Later, as Jackson walked Penelope through the garden behind the Collins home, the air fragrant with roses and honeysuckle, he seemed unusually nervous. "What is it?" she finally asked. "You've been distracted all evening." Jackson took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position," he said. "Foreman at the RRR. Jackson, that's wonderful," Penelope exclaimed. "You've certainly earned it." "There's more," he continued. "The current owner, Mr. Riley, is getting older. He's proposed a partnership. I'd manage the ranch now and gradually buy in over time until it's mine." Penelope's heart leaped with happiness for him. "That's everything you've wanted." "Almost everything," he corrected softly. Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "There's one more thing I want, Penny, the most important thing." As Penelope stood breathless with anticipation, Jackson dropped to one knee before her. "I love you," he said simply. These past months have been the happiest of my life, despite everything we've been through or perhaps because of it. I know who you are now, your strength and your kindness, your determination and your gentle heart. And I know without doubt that I want to spend my life with you." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small but brilliant diamond. "Penelope Granger, will you marry me?" "Choose me, not because you have to, but because you want to." Tears of joy spilled down Penelope's cheeks as she looked at this man who had risked everything to save her, who had shown her what real love could be. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jackson, I choose you, today and every day." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their future together. The trial of Cornelius Blackburn became the sensation of the Arizona territory, with newspapers from as far as San Francisco sending reporters to cover the proceedings. Penelope and Jackson both testified, as did dozens of others whose lives had been damaged by Blackburn's schemes. When the verdict finally came, it was decisive: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Blackburn to 15 years in territorial prison and ordered the forfeiture of his ill-gotten assets, many of which would be returned to their rightful owners. "Your father's land," Penelope said to Jackson as they left the courthouse after sentencing. "Will it come back to you?" "The judge believes so," Jackson confirmed, "though it may take time to sort through all the legal complexities." "That would be poetic justice indeed," she said, squeezing his hand. "To build our life together on the land your father loved." They were married that autumn in Prescott's white-steepled church, with Elizabeth serving as matron of honor and David as best man. Penelope wore a simple gown of ivory satin, her hair adorned with white roses from Elizabeth's garden. Jackson, handsome in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. Their vows were heartfelt and personal, promises of love and support through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was a seal on all they had overcome and all they hoped to build together. The reception was held at the Triple R Ranch, which would soon be their home. Friends from Prescott mingled with ranch hands and neighbors, celebrating not just a marriage but the triumph of justice and the promise of new beginnings. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the ranch yard, Jackson led Penelope away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. "Happy, Mrs. Emerson?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely," she answered, leaning back against his solid strength. "Though it still seems like a dream sometimes." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake from it," Jackson said, pressing a kiss to her temple. They stood together, watching as the sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and purple. Below them, laughter and music drifted up from their wedding celebration. Before them stretched the future. They would build together a future chosen freely, with open hearts and abiding love. "I never thought I could be this happy," Penelope confessed. "When I received my father's telegram, I believed my life was over. And now," she turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining with joy and certainty, "now I know it was just beginning." 5 years later, the Circle E Ranch, named in honor of Jackson's father, was thriving. The land that had been returned to Jackson through the courts had been expanded through careful purchases and wise management. A comfortable ranch house stood where once there had been only a cabin, with a wide porch where Penelope loved to sit in the evenings, watching the sun set over their land. On this particular evening, she was not alone on the porch. Beside her, Jackson sat in a rocking chair he had crafted himself, while at their feet played their children 3-year-old Thomas, named for Jackson's father, and 1-year-old Sarah, named for the woman who had helped them in their time of need. Papa story. Thomas demanded, climbing onto Jackson's lap with the easy confidence of a child who knows he is deeply loved. "Which one would you like, son?" Jackson asked, settling the boy comfortably against his chest. "The one about Mama and the bad man." Penelope exchanged an amused glance with her husband. Their courtship story, suitably simplified and with the most frightening elements removed, had become their son's favorite bedtime tale. "Well," Jackson began, his deep voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller, "once upon a time there was a beautiful young woman who was very sad because she had to marry someone she didn't love." "That's Mama," Thomas interjected. "That's right." "And one day, a cowboy saw her walking in town, and he thought she was the prettiest lady he'd ever seen. But more importantly, he saw that she was sad, and he wanted to help her." "That's you, Papa, indeed it is," Jackson confirmed with a wink at Penelope. "The cowboy learned that the lady was being forced to marry a man who wasn't kind or good, and he decided to rescue her." "With his horse," Thomas added excitedly. "With his horse," Jackson agreed. "He helped her escape and they rode away together into the mountains. And the bad man chased them." He tried to, but the cowboy knew the mountain trails better. "They reached safety, and the bad man was punished for all the wrong things he had done. And then you got married and lived happily ever after," Thomas concluded sleepily, familiar with the ending. "That's exactly right," Jackson said, dropping a kiss on his son's dark curls. "We lived happily ever after." As Thomas drifted towards sleep in his father's arms, and baby Sarah played contentedly with her wooden blocks, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. Cornelius Blackburn was still serving his sentence in the territorial prison. Penelope's father had visited once, meeting his grandchildren and mending the rift that Blackburn's manipulation had created between him and his daughter. He had returned to Kansas City, a happier man, with an open invitation to visit again whenever he wished. The R partnership had evolved as planned, with Jackson now half-owner and on track to assume full ownership within another 5 years. The combined resources of the R and the reclaimed Circle E had made the Emersons prosperous, respected members of the community. But it was not wealth or status that made Penelope's heart full as she watched her husband and children in the golden light of evening. It was love freely given and freely received, and the knowledge that she had found her true place in the world. "Penny for your thoughts," Jackson said softly, noticing her contemplative expression. She smiled, reaching across to take his free hand. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am, how different my life might have been if not for a brave cowboy who opened his heart and gave me a choice." "I'm the fortunate one," he countered. "Every day with you is a gift I never expected to have." As darkness settled over the ranch and stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, Penelope Emerson knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged with this man, these children, this life they had built together through courage and love and faith in each other. It was, indeed, their happily ever after.